Egypt in the Zeroth dynasty, 3000 BC. The sun cult and the moon cult, and then there is the cult of the crescent moon. The sun cult from Egypt drove out the moon cult and united Upper and Lower Egypt. Or they merged. The Narmer Palette. A children's army conquers all of Lower and Upper Egypt. This unites the White Crown and Red Crown of Egypt. Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. You women of Lamech, listen to my speech. Yes, I will kill a man for a wound, and a boy for a stripe. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. The Sunnites and the Anunnaki cult, red-headed twins who practice incest, descended from Anu, the first murderer, are described as extremely evil and prone to committing murder and incest. After seducing the Hittites, their descendants become the Nephilim, the mighty men, all of whom were destroyed in the flood, as in other works. At the birth of Noah, Lamech prophesied, "He will give us respite from our work and from the labor of our hands in the ground, which the Lord has cursed." Noah had 3 sons, Rekhet, Heti, and Sesheth, and a solar boat. Naamah is mentioned as the shared daughter of Lamech and Zillah. This therefore came from Adam and Eve's eldest son, Cain. But now her name was Esther. The flood came. The Nile floods once a year. Maybe you had to flee too. Or it was a prophetic mission to populate the world. But you probably just wanted to cut cedar wood like you do every year. Anyway, now God told Anu to get on a boat and start again. He gathered his animals and minions around him, one of each, and sailed away on the water for 100 days. Now his name was Utnapishtim, and he was an Anunnaki chief priest, and all the others were his slaves. The gods became afraid and retreated to the heavens of Anu. They huddled together like little dogs, crouching on the outer edge. Ishtar screamed like a woman in labor, and the goddess with a sweet voice lamented, "Alas, the old days have turned to dust because I said bad things in the council of the gods. How could I say bad things in the council of the gods and thereby bring about a catastrophe that would destroy my people? I had barely brought my people into being when they filled the sea like so many fish." The gods, those of the Anunnaki, wept with her. Also Shamash the sun god. But the flood washed up in Syria. In Canaan, and you founded the weather cult. But there was another god in Mesopotamia, on the Euphrates, in Mesopotamia. According to legend, Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. He has tremendous intelligence and is very strong, but he oppresses his people. The people call on the gods for help, and the sky god Anu, the chief of the gods, creates a wild man of great strength named Enkidu, who can compete with Gilgamesh. Eventually the two fight, but neither can win. Their enmity turns into homosexual love and then loyal friendship. The two new friends go on many adventures together, but then the gods kill Enkidu. Gilgamesh mourns his friend greatly and realizes that he too must die one day. However, then he hears of one who became immortal, Utnapishtim, the survivor of a great flood. Gilgamesh goes to the sea to find Utnapishtim, and he tells him about his unusual life and promised him eternal life. Now Gilgamesh was also under the spell of the Anunnaki. Better known as Lugal-Zagesi, was now also a slave of the gods. Lugal-Zagesi conquers all of Sumer with his feared Lugal Banda, the Lulubi, and gathered the slaves together on the mountain in Nineveh. The Anunnaki assimilated and corrupted the existing gods from Sumeria. Now the gods have returned to earth in the form of malicious temple priests. And now the Anunnaki were priest gods and ruled over the Sumerians. They built a ziggurat in every city and were worshipped. Each city-state around Sumer in Mesopotamia had its own god, and every god had its Anunnaki chief priest. They created the idol, and now everyone was slaves to the gods. The ultimate believer. He is said to be afraid of the sun. He would have to be born and raised just for the cult. He doesn't need to know anything else. A hollow soul without a will of its own. Anu, the Anunnaki high priest, was also known, among other things, as the father of Martu, Era, Baba, Jibal, Nisaba, Enlil, Gatumdu, Lamastu, and the weather god Hadad, as well as the seven gods. The evil seven are the sons of the sky god Anu. They eat human flesh and drink blood. When Sin, Samus, and Ishtar tried to share world domination with him and sent his child, the seven gods, against Sin, which surrounded Sin and caused a lunar eclipse. Only Eva could free Sin. According to legend, Cain is said to have traveled around 3000 BC. Founded the city of Anshan in Elam. He found a way through the mountains and led the Iranian uprising against the cruel prince Ajidahaka. Cain symbolized the fight against the tyranny of evil men and against oppression by foreign invaders. Now he was king and he had 3 sons. Jabal, patron of all nomads. Jubal the bard. And Tubal the blacksmith. Gog and Magog, city and new city, stretched the bow behind the Caucasus. God once poured iron on the mountain, but now this iron was thawing. Gog and Magog turned northwest and drew the bow around all of Mesopotamia. Now the new city should hit the first wave. The Karairaxes came across the Caucasus. A short time later, Gilgamesh is betrayed. 2400 BC. Sargon made from saffron. A cupbearer sneaks into the royal court. He has brought reinforcements from the mountains. Sargon of Akkad himself legitimized the violently usurped rule by citing divine election by the war goddess Inanna of Shem, represented by the Anunnaki priestess Ishtar. She outcompeted the other Anunnaki priests. Sargon's wife was Tasloltum, about whom little is known other than her name. The name translates roughly as "I took them as prey." According to a legend, Tasloltum was the former wife of Lugal-Zagesi. Sargon, the one with the crown of horns. I am the strong king, the king of Akkad. My mother was an outcast. I didn't know my father. My father's relatives live in the mountains. My birthplace is the city of Saffron, which lies on the banks of the Euphrates. The mother conceived me, the outcast gave birth to me secretly. She put me in a basket made of reeds and closed my openings with asphalt. She left me on the river from which I could no longer climb myself. The river carried me, it brought me to Aki the drawer of water. Verily Aki the water drawer brought me up by dipping the bucket. Aki the water drawer adopted me as his son, he truly raised me. Aki the water drawer truly employed me in his gardening work. During my gardening work, Ishtar really grew fond of me. For many years I truly exercised the kingship. I truly dominated and ruled the black-headed people. The temples were plundered and he drove the temple cult followers out of the cities into the mountains. Sargon of Akkad conquered the land and founded the city down the mountain. He had the temples burned down. At his behest, the old customs were rejected and a new order was introduced. First, the sovereign's prerogative over the temples was reversed. The inhabitants were freed from a series of bonded labor and the abusive exploitation of the economically weak by those of higher rank was prohibited. The Akkad Empire slowly collapsed. Many immigrants left the Euphrates and moved on to Anatolia. Others joined the cult of the gods. After Sargon's death, his successor, Naram-Sin, quickly realized that pure military force was not enough. The once sovereign city-states slowly isolated themselves again. The original Uruk cultures slowly re-established themselves. Naram-Sin's successor was his son Sarkalisari, after which the goddess Inanna left Akkad and the people who tolerate no restraints. Eventually, the Anunnaki gods decided that Akkad must be destroyed to save the other cities of Mesopotamia. The city-states rebelled. In the third generation, the main state of Akkad was destroyed. Independent city-states were formed again, many among the original rulers from Uruk times. Akkad confined itself to Larsa, under Rim-Sin, the wild bull of the moon god. But the Anunnaki god priests were strong and operated from Jamshid in Syria. 1800 BC, the Amorites and Hammurabi appeared. He came from Jamshid, Syria, where the Anunnaki chief priest Anu once landed and tricked Gilgamesh, where the weather god Hadad comes from. Jamshid allied with Mari, and Hammurabi conquered Uruk, Isin, and founded the city-state of Babylon. Larsa itself is said to have been defended by 40,000 soldiers. Rim-Sin was the last king of the Old Babylonian dynasty of Larsa in Mesopotamia. With its fall, the age of the Old Babylonian Empire began. The Codex Yuarnamu is the oldest written legal collection and was introduced by Hammurabi. The Sumerian cult of the weather god once arose in the Syrian region. People settled by the sea and paid homage to the weather god of water and rivers. He was different from the weather god from northern Syria. There they worshipped a similar version of the weather god, but this one stood for lightning, storms, and thunder, where the bows and chariots come from. North of the Caucasus, Purin or Rama is the supreme god of Slavic mythology. He is the god of storms, thunder, and lightning. His symbols include the iris, the axe, and the oak tree. His name means the one who hits hard. The oldest written tradition comes from the 6th century BC. Procopius of Caesarea reports about a thunder god, whom the Slavs worship as the only deity and to whom they offer animal sacrifices. Where the meteorite once hit and the iron was found, they joined together to form the Hittite League. Among the Slavs who once immigrated from the Caucasus Mountains, the first Hittite settlement arose on the Anatolian mountains under a king under Caraxes, Hattians, and Hurrians. 1600 BC, with the new power of iron, the king of the Hittites went to Babylon and laid waste the city. After the capture of Babylon, he succumbed to an assassination attempt and several regional rulers of the Hutti were established. Babylon fell to the Kassites, the last immigrant wave of mountain Semites beyond the Caucasus. The Kassites were the most impious of the barbarians and plundered the remaining temples for the next 400 years. This was also the end of the Old Babylonian Empire. The Amorites and the Anunnaki priests were driven out of Babylon to Canaan, where they joined forces with the Hyksos, it is said of crowns of horns, and conquered the upper parts of Egypt. At this time, the biblical Abraham also fled Ur. But this is another story. Utnapishtim, the Anunnaki priest god, once sent his son Japhet to settle in Greece. To Crete to Knossos. There was copper there. And this is how the Minoan culture came into being. When the Bronze Age began, the Luwians went to Anatolia in search of bronze and founded Troy. But now came Gog and Magog. They drew the bow to Greece. The Khaganate and its nomadic horse people moved west, and numerous other Khaganates joined to form a Khazar Khaganate. It drew the bow and everyone fled, joined, or died. Even the cannibalistic tribes. This led to the end of the Minoan culture.